Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me? I like to scoot around, so you'll forgive me, but I'm not very good at staying in one place. I thought today I'd talk to you about people within the supply chain. Ambassador De Backer alluded to that earlier. Often people think, or the outside person's perception is, this individual has been rescued, and therefore they're safe, they're free. But at that point begins another perilous journey, a journey of another form of survival, a journey where often economic alternatives don't exist, a journey where justice means you have to stand and face your perpetrators in court, testify, watch the perpetrators be convicted, and often leave with no compensation in it for you. You go back to a life, often a life of exploitation, a life of lack of economic opportunities. On a recent trip to Thailand, I was talking to somebody who was a trafficked fisherman. And as a typical lawyer, I said to him, so when you came off the boat, were you aware of your rights? Did you do what did you go to court and did you do this and that? And he said, when I came off the boat, all I could think of was survival. And that was my first and foremost instinct. I just wanted to share with you a couple of slides, snapshots of cases that have happened, of the difficulties that people within the supply chain or people who are otherwise enslaved face when they've left their situations of slavery and they're attempting to find justice. This is a snapshot of a case which was very well publicized, the Benjy Nam Bond case, which linked seafood supply to various major Western retailers to some fishermen who were trafficked on boats. I'd like to draw your attention to the numbers. 13 fishermen from Myanmar out of a total 500 sued their traffickers for damages. Where were the others? What happened to the others? And why didn't they sue? They received 3-year sentence for human trafficking and fines of about 12,250 or a choice to serve 2 or more months in jail. This is a case from the province of Ranong, where the case was dismissed by the judge, who said that this was not a trafficking case because the individuals had voluntarily boarded the boat and that it was physically impossible to work for 22 hours a day. The case was dismissed. This is another case of Cambodian villagers who were recruited to work in the Thai seafood industry and who have now filed a civil lawsuit in the United States under the TVPRA. The case comes to trial in January. Why the need to fight a case in the United States when the violations were committed in Thailand? There are many questions that arise when you look at these cases. And what do these cases tell us? There is often a poor understanding and application of the law. Nobody consents to being trafficked. The circumstances in which trafficking takes place, the profits are maximized because individuals work at no cost for hours on end, often with substance abuse. The scale of investigations we find is often not commensurate with the scale of the problem. There is such a big reliance on victims, on victim testimony, and not enough on corroborative evidence and on financial investigations to support victims' testimony. Oftentimes, victims are given the option in various jurisdictions to actually go to a labor tribunal, which is sort of a conciliatory forum where there is a mediation between the employer and the employee. Often, victims of trafficking are tempted to take a payout at that point, because waiting for a long and uncertain justice system to resolve itself in favor or against the individual is a risk they cannot take. We came across countless of people who had taken very small payoffs because even if they were awarded a decent amount of money by the provincial court, the matter would then have to be looked at by a superior court before the payment was made. It takes 4 or 5 years for a matter to be referred. In that time, the individual has to move on. They've been repatriated. They need to earn a living. They have obligations back home. Many are still debt bonded. The compensation we often find is very insufficient in relation to the profits that are made out of these individuals. We have banks present here today. We've talked about financial investigations, reporting of suspicious activities. What I want to see is asset seizures. I want to see asset seizures where the money that is seized goes not into the coffers of governments, but into victims' funds, so that that can be used to compensate victims. Why is it okay for over 100 million of asset seizures to go into a fund that goes to training law enforcement? Of course, training is important, but so are the victims. Oftentimes, and the reason why I say this is because when you look at many of these cases, even in the cases where there have been very significant awards of money in favor of the victim is then left with the matter of enforcing that decision. You've got a beautiful piece of paper that tells you you've been awarded $5 million US. How do you enforce that? It's up to you to go find the assets of the traffickers, and it's up to you to make sure you get paid what you're owed. There are so many cases lingering at the moment where individuals have received awards, but actually are unable to enforce those awards. What kind of justice is that? What kind of justice is it when you meet a woman who was enslaved at the age of 6, who stayed in slavery until she was rescued at the age of 19, who left pregnant at the age of 19, and now raises a little boy who was born out of rape? She is unable to work because of trauma she has sustained over the years. And she finds herself in a situation where she resorts to survival sex. It's the only way she can look after her child and ensure that maybe he someday will not lead a life of exploitation. The other side of the story is weak corporate accountability. In many jurisdictions, the laws that exist to hold corporates accountable are very weak. We're going to talk on the next panel in a moment about transparency. I want to talk about accountability. There is so little transparency in the way lots of industries are operated in our part of the world. And often no enforcement is taken against corporations. You could count on your fingers how many cases are brought against corporates successfully in many of these jurisdictions. Access to justice. Some of the common problems we see are very scarce state-funded legal aid. There's a lack of awareness of people's rights and remedies. You'd be surprised, but in a country, and I won't name any countries, there's press in the room, I need to travel back there next week, so in many countries, there are 25 lawyers in total that are able to represent victims of human trafficking. I mean, that's nothing. That's nothing. So people go without representation. Often representation that is available is not experienced and qualified enough. The asymmetry of resources between corporates on the one hand and individual victims is so stark, it's frightening. Corporates are able to bring lawsuits against workers who are bringing cases. Corporates are able to bring defamation suits. And oftentimes, human rights defenders and workers are left with really no remedy. Another thing I wanted to touch upon was the lack of dispute resolution mechanisms in the private sector. Access to remedy, the UN guiding principles. None of this is new. But when you look around, in many jurisdictions in our region, workers don't have the right to unionize. Oftentimes, accessing courts can be difficult for the reasons I mentioned. What choice does that worker have in the event that there is a dispute with the employer? Not much. The reliance on the need for an effective dispute resolution mechanism, which is fair, accessible, and transparent within the company, is tremendous. So with that in mind, I have very little time. As usual, I've missed the art of being concise, which escaped me when I went to law school. And that's why I was never a good corporate lawyer, but here we go. I had some other skills, a special set of skills, as Liam Neeson called it. We came up with the idea of having a legal impact hub. We felt that there was a great need for the law to do more and to be pushed to do more. And what this platform is basically a platform that brings together a targeted group of stakeholders who all have varying agendas with a view to sharing knowledge and actionable information. And why was it necessary? Because we need to bring together the complementarity of purchase. If you think about what was outlined in Ambassador De Baca's speech earlier, the criminal justice approach that he talked about, if you think about what the previous panel just discussed, following the money and looking at the money piece, looking very much, as Stop the Traffic said, as slavery as an illicit business, then it figures that any solution has to sort of harmoniously bring these two approaches together. And this is what we want to do with this, by allowing an improved flow of intelligence, but also allowing a greater engagement with the private sector. And these are the stakeholders we're targeting. And given today we are in the business of enlisting, support from you guys, so here's my challenge to you. If you fall into any one of these categories, come and find me after my session or during the break and tell me what you're going to help me do to launch this Legal Impact Hub. So here's what we're doing. We have two focus areas, the private sector focus and a victim focus area. The victim focus area is all about training, capacity building with civil society, helping nurture and originate cases. Many of them will be financial compensation cases. Many of them will be cases of strategic importance. Engaging with law enforcement judiciary, there's no longer an excuse for judges to say, sorry, who works 18 hours a day? Well, some people clearly do. In fact, 45.8 million people do. It's important to understand victim identification procedures. One of the common problems emerging in the region is that a victim who's identified in Cambodia and repatriated to, let's say, Myanmar, is not recognized as a victim in Myanmar. And they will often be made to pay for their airfare back home. So they actually end up at home, having been trafficked, being debt bonded, and further in debt. The private sector focus is very much about understanding regulatory frameworks. It might surprise you, but when you look at certain industries, palm oil being one of them, there is a discrepancy between the way the industry is regulated, the way labor standards work, and the way the anti-trafficking regime works. And what happens when you have these three silos is some very vulnerable people fall within the cracks. There is no reason for that to happen anymore. So we want to work on identifying the gaps and addressing those. And identification and engagement with industry regulators for guidance, for more visibility of human trafficking, forced labor, and modern-day slavery. And of course, improving industry accountability and liability. This is what the ideal outcome looks like. Discussions, trainings, briefings, critical assessments, collaboration platforms, and these you will see reflected all the way through. I'm 2 minutes and 15 seconds over time, so I'm avoiding Kimberly's look right now. And, but I just want to leave you with this thought, and I'm sorry I raced through the last bit, but I think you get the gist. There are some fairly critical problems that face a lot of very vulnerable people whose journey has not ended because they have been rescued. So I ask you to think about your daily jobs. A lot of what I do would not be possible without the support of banks and financial institutions we work with, regulators who give me the time of day, a lot of law firms who are present in the room today. So I do ask you for your continued support and for more support with finding a way to bridge the two narratives, the narrative of the world of NGOs and the narrative of the corporate world. We should be joined up in fighting this because without, now I need to get this the right way around. Without justice, there is no freedom. There we go. Thank you.